Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Thank you so much indeed for downloading this episode of the Salescadence Podcast. As always, an absolute delight to spend some quality time in your company today. I've invited my good friend of the show, an all-round decent human being, Neil Foley, to join me. Neil, for those of you who don't know him, he's a really good friend of mine. Above all else, he's an exceptional business coach, and that's the reason I found Neil initially a couple of years ago. So just delighted to get Neil involved in this episode because we're going to have some fun, aren't we, Neil?
Yeah, we certainly are. We will. Whether anybody else will, who knows?
So what we're going to talk about today on the podcast is what we believe to be sales greatness. There's a lot of examples out there in the marketplace of really great salespeople. And I guess before we even get into the main event, Neil, perhaps you should just qualify why you think you're in a good position to at least offer some examples of sales greatness. What allows you the opportunity to have a contribution in the world of selling?
That's a good question, isn't it? I guess because I've been a victim of so much poor selling over the years, so I managed to reach the grand old age of 63, and there's just so much bad stuff about. People taking you for granted and not returning calls and just general process stuff. But then when you came up with this idea as a topic, because we haven't shared who we're talking about, have we? So I have no idea who's on your list or who's on mine. Actually,
it's going to be incredibly embarrassing if we come up with the same name.
Well, at least a couple I know you won't, because I don't think you know them. But then when you think of good behaviour, it suddenly shines through, doesn't it? And you think, actually, that was really, I remember some of these are really quite old, but they're still very vivid in my mind. So I think that's what qualifies.
Bit of background about Neil as well. Neil, not only does he help me out in the training company that I run, he also has his own business. He's bought and sold businesses. He helps loads and loads of startups and micro businesses be better at what they do from a sales and marketing perspective. That's right, isn't it, Neil?
Yeah, absolutely. It is. Entirely that focus.
Okay, we might share at the end of the podcast some links because Neil's the sort of guy, if you're in that space, that might be worth hanging around with. Right, Neil, let's get into it. So we've got 10 examples of what we believe is sales greatness or great salespeople. Why don't you kick us off? What's your first one?
First one, I have to say I don't even know the guy's name, but I can set the scene of the story. I was going to see a client in Cambridge, a big corporate client in my previous life. But this is probably 20 odd years ago, I would guess. So I'm walking to this guy's office in Cambridge. I don't live in Cambridge, so you have to park up and walk. And I pass a small, what you would call a gentleman's outfit. So a nice tailoring shop. And in the window, they had a particular hat, an outdoor hat, that was quite expensive. And I remember thinking, that's quite nice. Maybe I'll have a look at that on the way back. So go and do my business with the corporate client. We have a good meeting. I'm feeling quite confident and feeling quite flush. So I come back and I go into the shop to try this hat on. And it's called a Tilly hat. So Tilly is the make. I think it's a Canadian make.
Yeah.
Tough as old boots. They're designed to say one of their ideas is that they've got a lifetime guarantee. So if it deteriorates for any reason at all, you get another Tilly hat, they'll replace it. And it floats because it was made for sailors, and they've got stories about it being eaten by an elephant and all sorts of stuff. So I try this. So I go and see this hat, but it's about 45 quid. And I'm thinking, I've never spent 45 quid on a hat. Sort of trying it on and the rest of it. And the salesperson, who's the genius of this story, he's the classic in terms of he's ever so slightly borderline surly. And he comes over to me and says, so what do you think of the hat then? And I'm trying it on. And I said, yeah, I like it. But what I'm thinking is, what will my kids think? And without any hesitation, he just came back, and I'm going to swear now, he just came back and said, don't they take the piss out of everything you wear? And he said it with no smile on his face, deadpan, looking straight in the eyes. And I said, well, yeah, they do. So he said, well, buy the bloody thing. And it was just that classic, what's the objection? What's your thoughts? None of this do you want to think about it. Just straight in there, and then just ask for the deal. And of course I did, because I'm then faced with a choice, aren't I? I'm either saying I'm a wimp, and I'm going to give in to what other people think about what I wear, or I'm going to say, no, I'm going to make a statement. You're absolutely right, I'm going to buy the bloody thing.
Brilliant. So his his whole personality and the style in which he communicated with you obviously had a bearing impact on you, because you're relating the story right now. Yeah, but you weren't offended by that. You found it amusing, or you found it engaging?
That's why it was so clever, I think, Matt. In terms, I wasn't offended in the slightest. It helped clarify my own thinking, to think, actually, here's me debating whether to buy this because of what somebody else thinks. So it was that classic, get the objection and just nail it. And he wasn't afraid of asking for the business. So he was just putting me in a corner to say, look, either buy it or leave the shop. And I didn't regret it. In the sense, I remember walking home, or walking back to the car, thinking, I've just spent 45 quid on that.
Yeah.
And of course, when I did take it home, they did take the mick. And when I told them the story, they thought that was hysterical. So that's my first guy. I don't even know his name.
Love it. But okay, so the moral of the story is don't be afraid to ask for the business properly.
Absolutely. So who's your first one then, Matt? What's your first experience?
I've gone a little bit more mainstream in so much as my first guy is Daniel Priestley. And many people will know who Daniel Priestley is. If you don't, then I'll give you a bit of a background information. But the reason I picked Daniel Priestley is a lot of what he shares with his audience and with his clients is the importance of being the go-to person in your market. And for me, sales greatness is about creating that environment where people come to you. Because it's a lot easier, Neil, as we both know, to have a pipeline which is predicated on people coming to you to fill it, rather than you having to go out there and prospect and outbound. So Daniel Priestley, what do I know about him? Co-founder of Dent Global. So for those that don't know Dent Global, they're sort of a leading business accelerator provider in the UK. They're based in Australia. I think they're in Singapore now, certainly in Canada. They work alongside sort of thousands of entrepreneurs each year, putting them through their workshops. I think they have a 9-month program which takes somebody who's got a startup idea right the way through the threshold of tax, and then into sort of turning it into hundreds and thousands of pounds worth of revenue, really. Himself often named in many of the sort of top 10 business advisor categories that you can find around on Google. What's interesting about him, Neil, was he's an Aussie. He's been in the UK for about 12 years now, I think. But he came across from the other side of the world with a credit card of 500 quid in his pocket. And he was very, very much the guy that made good. I mean, he had some success in Australia before he came over, but he sort of turned that 500 quid now into millions. Written a number of books, I think at least 4 oversubscribed, Entrepreneur Revolution, 24 Assets. But the one that is, I think, the interesting book of the 4 that he's written is Key Person of Influence. And he talks about the 5 Ps in that book, Neil: product, pitch, profile, publish, and partnership. So for me, what Daniel Priestley done, the reason why he's sort of my first one in the Sales Greats list, is he absolutely practices what he preaches. If you've ever Googled yourself, Neil, like I have, if you're lucky, you pop up because, you run a successful business and you've got a podcast. And if I Google myself, I pop up, my books that I've written come up as well. If you Google Daniel Priestley, you've got like feed after feed after feed of him appearing in places and on YouTube. The sort of the moral of the story, as far as my first one, is if you Googled yourself, do you like what you see? And if you don't, what could you do to be a bit like Daniel Priestley and become that sort of key person in your marketplace?
Yeah. And as you say, it's that key person, then the public profile is massive, isn't it? And I think that's a common theme with some of the others that I'm going to talk about, in terms of they've got multiple ways of, you finding them.
Love it. Go on then. Give me your second one.
Well, I wasn't going to use my second one first, but I will, following Daniel Priestley, in terms of Seth Godin. And taking your theme, Seth has got so many different ways in terms of publishing talking about what he preaches in the sense of he's got podcasts, which he does seem to be almost daily, but certainly weekly. He's got a daily blog, which is very high quality. Sometimes you get 2 a day. They're all pithy. They're not, I went down the shops today, or here's something to sell you. They're all stuff that stop you and make you think. Actually, even if it's a one-liner. But the message is very consistent, which is the same with Daniel in terms of very high quality. He's got courses. He's done over 20 books.
Yeah.
You could argue that some of them are on the same theme. But in some ways, that's the consistency of message that is so good about Seth. The message doesn't really change. The key principles don't really change. His is all about niche is everything, consistency of the message. One of his straplines is people like us do things like this. And it's just, It's so clever, isn't it? He just shows up every day, and he's not your classic salesperson. He's quiet. He's very quietly spoken. He's not afraid to be controversial. He'll be deeply critical of things like the education system in the US. So he doesn't just touch on business ideas.
It's an interesting point, Neil, because when you mentioned Seth Godin, I thought, he's not a sales guy. And then, of course, after a couple of seconds, I thought, actually, yes, he is. He's probably one of the best. And, the big takeaway from you bringing his name to my attention is the great salespeople don't come across as salespeople.
Absolutely.
They come across as Priestley, as influencers, as Seth Godin is, people that really do, sort of dominate the space without being pushy or aggressive or forceful. They really do pull you rather than push you, don't they?
And just to think about that point for a second, because you're absolutely right in terms of he's not a great, you may not initially think he's a great salesperson, but think about this. Some of his courses, in fact, I think probably most of his courses, there is no content. So he does an alternative MBA, which is a very short course over, I can't remember, it's a few weeks. Thousands of people sign up for it for a lot of money every time. The pricing structure always goes up. So he says, right, today is Purple Circle Day. So this is the cheapest you're going to get the course. Every day from here on in until it launches in X days' time, it's going to get more expensive. You sign up for the course, and then he puts you in groups of people, and he says, well, you talk about what you want to talk about. So you think, you've got this guy who's selling millions of pounds worth of courses, and he hasn't created anything. I mean, he's created the structure and the framework and the support and the environment, but he's not saying, right, let me teach you something. He's just saying to all of you, well, what do you want to know? Mm-hmm. How can you help each other? Meet Neil. Yeah. Neil's in this environment. And you're thinking from a sales viewpoint, that's phenomenal, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I haven't even created a course. Actually, you tell me what you want. And by the way, give me your $4,000 to do this.
That deadline thing got me going as well, because that deadline thing is all about. In fact, he didn't make my list. I don't know if you got Robert Cialdini in your list, but he talks about scarcity so much. But there's another one.
Seth does that a lot. So who's your?
So my number two then. Well, you might not know him actually, Neil. So number two for me, to achieve sales greatness, then you have to deliver value, and that phrase, delivering value, gets right up my hooter, if I'm honest with you. And we might explore that in a second. But in terms of it is a necessity to deliver value. That delivering value can only be value perceived by the prospect or buyer, and sometimes we get it wrong as salespeople because we think we're delivering value, and actually no one gives a toss. But isn't it? It's an essential prerequisite of being great at selling is being able to put this value in the marketplace. And my number two, Neil, is Mike Winnett. I don't know if you follow Mike Winnett on LinkedIn.
Is he the most hated sales trainer in the UK?
That's somebody else. That's Benjamin Dennehy, who also should have got on our list, but he didn't get on mine. Sorry, but Ben, if you're listening, sorry, mate. Mike's interesting guy. So he's a born and bred from Warrington up in the northwest. Had a reasonably successful business, which he sold, and that gave him a few quid for him to sort of buy his time and decide what he wanted to do. And during that period of sort of reflecting on life with a few quid in the bank and deciding what he was going to do for the rest of his life, he started to populate and frequent LinkedIn, but he came onto there in a sort of a pseudo of himself, which was this kind of parody business guru, right? And he came across and he presented himself as the number one demotivational speaker. And really what he was doing was creating this brand where he would start to sort of expose the self-help gurus who weren't helping anybody. And he since then, Neil, he's evolved it onto this brand which he talks about, the Contrepreneur. So he's made it. I mean, talk about outstanding value. If you go onto his YouTube channel, you will see, at least 15 or 20 good 10, 15 minute movies that he's created or clips that he's created. Fantastic editing work, really creative, where he's basically exposing some of the greats in the industry, some of the big names like Tony Robbins, like Gary Vaynerchuk, Grant Cardone, Dan Painter, Brian Rose, Ty Lopez, all the big names that you see hovering around on YouTube. Now, I'm not here to knock any of those guys. I don't know anything about them personally, so I can't be critical. But I can certainly enjoy the value that Mike Winnett delivers when he tries to expose them as not being entrepreneurs, but being entrepreneurs. And if you do get a chance to go on his YouTube channel, you can watch these videos. He plays a game of entrepreneur bingo. So he has a number of these different phrases and words that all the entrepreneurs use. Bullshit backstory. So at some point, someone will say to you, "Yeah, I wasn't always a multi-billionaire. I can remember growing up on the streets of Detroit. I lived in a paper bag and I licked the road clean with my tongue. That's the only way I could make a living all day long." And they've all got this kind of bullshit backstory, which might win it exposed. And of course, when they announce it, he ticks it off his list. Um, so for me, whether you agree with him or not, whether you think the Entrepreneur Bingo videos are really good fun or not, the fact that I'm bringing it to this podcast and telling you about it is it's of value to me. And if I'm honest with you, I'd pay to watch them. I really would. And the sad irony there is, Neil, is he is being paid because there are lots of advertisers now that buy that space to advertise before and during his videos. So I put him in the list as a great salesman for sure.
You've certainly talked to me about it before, and I have seen. I've forgotten.
Yeah, he is. He's a super guy. One of the great things, and quite an ironic one for me, is he single-handedly exposed the Amazon bestseller status. We all know you can bullshit the algorithm on there and get to in the top. I mean, I got to number 3 with Converted. It's a great book, don't get me wrong, but you only hang around up there for a day or two, and then you're back into the depths of 300, 400, or even thousands. But he got to bestseller status and stayed there for quite a while with a book with no words in it.
Really?
How brilliant is
that? Wow!
Yeah.
That's a great. Yeah. I mean, it's all about living the put your heart on your sleeve and be open and transparent.
Yeah. And resonating with your ICP. So I guess the takeaway from me really is this, question to the listener off the back of why I think that Mike Winitz gets number 2 of the importance of delivering value. Is just ask yourself, are you producing sort of valuable and insightful content to your ideal customers? And if you're not, what could you do to start doing a bit more of that? Because the more that you resonate with people that want what you've got, the better the chance you've got of them getting involved with it, really. Neil, number 3 from you.
Well, can I do 2.5?
Yeah, of course.
And we won't talk about this guy, but Trump, because that follows up because he's such a repulsive individual. But one of the things I think from a sales viewpoint, if you think that he knows his audience, and he's not afraid to go against the mainstream, he just talks to his niche. He may talk nonsense. He talks in a language that none of us would want. He has lots of failings, but I was just thinking from a sales viewpoint, the reality is he understands his marketplace like nobody else. So he's extraordinary. But let's not talk about it because I think actually he's so ridiculous that we can't really talk about him.
Well, I'll level with you. He nearly got in my top 5.
Really?
Yeah, he did for pretty much the same reason that you've come with. But we appear to. Great minds think tonight, decide to leave him out.
Yeah, we'll leave him out.
Go on, number 3.
So number 3 is Dale Carnegie. He published How to Win Friends and Influence People. He wrote it in 1936.
Wow.
And it was published in 1937. It's never been out of print. And what I read literally last week that it's in the top 10 bestseller list currently in China. So you've got something that's 80-odd years old and is as relevant now as it was then.
That's what you call a real bestseller.
Well, that's unbelievable, isn't it? And to be in the top 10 in China. But I love the fact that I was first given his book when I was first in sales. I was trying to work out the date, and I think it was probably something like 1984 or 1985 when I first had a proper sales job. I had other jobs selling stuff, but this was something I was going to be a proper salesperson. And the sales trainer I had gave me a call. Because the fundamental message nowadays, we would probably call it emotional intelligence.
Yep.
Whereas they didn't have that terminology then, or they didn't use it. But there was nothing artificial about it, about the fact that you just need to get along with people. So how do you get along with people better? And this idea, because you talked about it early on, is in the sense of people are interested in themselves and they're interested in what's relevant to them rather than let me give you all the features of my product, as you would say, then vomit all the benefit, features.
Yeah.
But actually what's relevant to me is the only thing that really matters in my mind.
Oh, that's one of the golden principles of selling is people buy for their reasons and not yours.
Not ours, absolutely. And he nailed that. He also called it an action book, which I love. And this whole concept about fake it till you make it. So, if you have to pretend you're interested in somebody, then do just that. And I remember very clearly there were times when you're interested, you're faking an interest in somebody or whatever because you're thinking, I've got to ingratiate myself because I was a bit naive in those days. But lo and behold, normally when you did that, you suddenly found they were interesting. And because you've written them off as saying, well, they're a boring suit or they're the wrong age or the wrong demographic for me. Actually, the moment you dig underneath and ask proper open questions of people and what motivates them, nearly always you find something you think, blimey, who'd have thought that? So I think it's as bang on now as it was then.
Yeah, and I've got a copy of sitting on my bookcase behind me. I think most people, if they don't know it was by Dale Carnegie, would certainly recognise the name of the book. So it is one of those books that you could probably say most people would have heard of it.
So that's my number 3. Who's your number 3?
So my number 3, sadly, is no longer with us. He died a few years ago, actually. He's number 3 for me because one of them, the fundamental principles that you and I hold very strong within the world of selling and sales greatness, Neil, is the fact that you do need to have some process.
Yes.
A repeatable process that you can work to, because otherwise you're kind of winging it. And Joe Ades, for those that don't know him, basically spent his days, or most of his days, selling potato peelers on the streets of New York. And over a sort of 60-year period of doing that, he amassed a fortune that allowed him to buy a penthouse apartment on Fifth Avenue. He stumbled across the ability that if he put together a number of component pieces, which I'm going to call a process, then you can have real success. And the component pieces were, if I find myself populating the busy streets of New York, I will always have an endless supply of potential prospects. If I've got something that's affordable, and these potato peelers, Neil, were $5 each, then I'm not really putting a barrier to entry in front of too many people. If I can find a way of attracting them, that gets me the audience. And then all I've got to do is have this repeatable pitch that's engaging, useful, solves a problem, and basically creates a call to action. And that's essentially what Joe Ades did. And if you go onto YouTube and put his name in, you can watch 2 or 3 different versions of him delivering his sales pitch over about 8 or 9 minutes to this audience of people who are buying these $5 peelers. And he sort of his golden nugget was he would dress sartorially. So he would often wear a 3-piece suit, a silk tie, a polka dot handkerchief in his top pocket, a great set of brogues. And it was that sort of uniqueness that attracted the crowd. And when they heard his pitch, they really bought into it. He was once interviewed on the US Today show, and the interviewer asked him, so why on earth did you pick a $5 potato peeler? And he was famously said, he never underestimate a small amount of money captured daily.
That's a great line, isn't it?
Isn't it just?
Oh,
you can only do that with a process.
Yes.
So he gets number 3 on my list, and my question to the listener is a bit like Joe. Have you got a sales process that you can switch on every day that gives you the best possible chance of mitigating the risks and maximising the potential? And on the odd occasion, because we all have bad days, Neil, on the odd occasion it goes wrong, you can go back into your process and point, that's the reason why that deal failed. Number 4, go on then.
My number 4 was a fellow that we don't communicate now, but we used to for a very long time, called Richard May. And Richard is easily the brightest guy I've ever met. I think an industrial chemist by sort of training. But he sold a franchise, and he was very much a business coach and a business guru, had done a lot of turnaround work, highly intelligent. He came up with the idea of a franchise. He pulled together nothing unique, but he pulled together lots of different themes and thoughts, because there is nothing unique around in the business world or in selling. But he pulled all these threads together. But the bit I loved about Richard is he had processes for everything. But I remember getting involved in the process for him for if you were interested in buying a franchise. So it was entirely process driven, but I loved the fact it was transparent.
Okay.
So he told you exactly what was going to happen. So he sent you some information by email, and then he would say, in 5 days' time, at this time, you're going to get another email. In that email will be an attachment. You need to read the attachment, and you need to decide and take action. It's either A or B. And in 5 days' time, and you could, if you emailed him back to say, "Can I have it now?" he'd say, "No, I want you to think about it, and in 5 days' time, you're going to get the email." And it all happened in a sequence. And he also he lived and died by it, because one of the first things you had to do was go to a discovery day, which is very classic with franchises or anything like that. You go to a discovery day, and it was very clear. This starts at 12 o'clock. If you're late, you won't be allowed in. So it's at 12 o'clock, and it will run for 2 hours, and at the end of it, you'll get a chance to do X, Y, Z. And he started bang on time. And literally about 5 minutes after he started, somebody opened the door to say, "I'm sorry, I'm late." And he said, "That is maybe, but you're not allowed in." He said, "Well," I got delayed on X, Y, Z. And he turned to the rest of us and said, he picked people out and said, "How far did you come?" And we came from Norwich, and somebody else came from Norwich. He said, "These people got here in time because they're serious about it. You're clearly not, so you're not allowed in the room. So can you close the door on your way out?"
It's a really fascinating approach, isn't it?
It is, isn't it? And you just think, this guy's for real. This guy's really serious. And he had that approach. He had lots of little anecdotes that I could tell about him. There was one where we started a session, and there were 5 of us, I think, in the room. So he starts the session. He did the classic, "If you could please turn your phones off." And a couple of the bods in the room actually went to their phones to turn them off. And he stopped the whole meeting and said, "What do you mean to tell me you didn't think of that before you got in this room?"
Wow.
Because I thought you were serious about doing something, and it turns out actually you haven't got a brain. So either wake up or get out.
Wow.
And you think, wow, and it just makes you think you're in the hands of a master. I think that's what it demonstrated to me, is thinking about it now. You're in the hands of somebody who knows what they're doing.
Yeah, there's a number of things that come to mind. That was the first point that came to mind there is I don't think any prospect or potential customer has a problem being led. The example you gave at the start, where there was a kind of upfront visibility about what's going to happen if you decide to get involved. I think that's a really good practice. I think that's a real sales great tactic. Let's eliminate the smoke and mirrors. Let's take away the risk that you might have by letting me show you there's nothing up my sleeve. Here's what's going to happen should you decide to go forward. Right? I think it's brilliant. I think the second thing that came to mind in that as well was back to Robert Cialdini and the importance of scarcity.
Yes.
Only a number of places. Now we have to be really careful with that to some extent, Neil, because I think most people are aware of scarcity tricks. But if I give you an example of someone who didn't make my list, who perhaps in hindsight should have done, and I've spoken about him to you many times before, a guy called Sean D'Souza has a wonderful podcast called The 3-Month Vacation. He teaches in abundance the importance of scarcity, and in fact sells all of his products in exactly that way. They're going on sale a week on Tuesday at 9 o'clock. Actually, you can't just turn up at 9 o'clock. You have to get on the list before that. And he puts up these very polite but important entry barriers that if you're willing to get over or go through, then you are qualifying yourself in, and he's disqualifying out people that aren't, as your guy said, aren't serious enough. Back to our friend Benjamin Dennehy, world's most hated sales trainer, does exactly that with his discovery calls. So he'll charge you 99 quid for half an hour of his time, and quite rightly so. He might not get many calls. I'm not doing an injustice. I don't know the answer to that. My point is he might not get many calls, but the ones he gets, he knows they're turning up for a reason. Not just trying to rob him of his time or his information. So,
absolutely. They're serious, aren't they? So who's your number 4 then?
So number 4, you won't know him, but there's a guy in Barbados called Derek. And Derek gets on my list because my sort of number 4 rule for sales greatness is you have to be respectfully expectant. And Derek, bless his heart, is the jet ski guy. So I've been on holiday over there a few times, and every time I go there, Derek is on the beach. He's always there every day to sell me a ride on his jet ski, right? And some of the qualities that Derek has are as follows. First of all, he shows up every day. And that is one of the key things that salespeople do. And the ones that do it are the ones that see a real return. Now, clearly, you've got to be doing some valuable stuff on the day, but turning up and being persistent, I think, is a key thing. But he would turn up every single day. So more often than not, when I would poodle down at the beach after breakfast at about 9 o'clock in the morning, he'd already be sitting there on his jet ski, smiling at me, right? Then he's into building rapport, and he'll always have a conversation. How was your night? What did he up to last night? Here's what I did. So he's not going in for the quick close. But ultimately then, of course, within 2 or 3 minutes, he knows, because he's in the business of turning cash, he's got to ask me for the sale. So he says, come on a ride on the jet ski today, Matt? And now, of course, I've been on his jet ski a number of times, but he and I sort of struck up quite a nice relationship over the times I've been there. And he often would sit down over lunchtime. I'd go and get him a cheeky drink from the bar, you know how it is. And we'd sit and have a chat over sort of 20 minutes, having a drink. And he said, sometimes, Matt, I have to play the long game. He said, because there are people on this beach, I know that if I go up to them and ask them if they want to jump on the jet ski, I know I'm going to get a no. And I can kill a sale or two if I'm too pushy in the first week. I know they're a captured audience. They're not going anywhere for 2 weeks, so they're mine. I've just got to make sure I don't approach them and put them off, because I play the long game. And I thought, that's brilliant advice. So he knows who his ideal customer is, and he knows that because he's got them in a captured environment, figure of speech, then he can just decide when the right time is to strike. Often here's the response, not today. So when he says, do you want to come and ride on the jet ski, buddy? Not today. And because he's heard that so often, and because he knows they're here for 2 weeks, he always replies to that objection with a response. So when they say, not today, buddy, he says, okay, what time tomorrow, 9 or 2? And you just think, just genius. And they do exactly that, Neil. They laugh at it. And I've seen him do it. He said, I'll tell you what, I'll put you down for 2 because you're going to have a great night tonight, aren't you? And he builds that rapport and he assumes the close. And 9 times out of 10, I see him on the beach at 2 o'clock the following afternoon and they're all ready to jump on the back of his bike.
Really?
Cut a long story about Derek really, really short, just to give you another sort of final bit. And I'm not trying to take any kudos for this, but this is something that happened the last time I was over there. I said, you got to start asking a few more open questions, Derek. I love closed questions more than anybody. I think they're as important, if not more important than open ones, actually, because at least you get a decision and you can move a conversation forward. I said, but you do have to ask some more open questions. And I sort of gave him this one. I said, why don't you ask this one? I'll go up to that lady over there and ask her, when was the last time you really forgot your worries? You're here on holiday to do just that. So when do you really, are you sitting there thinking about things at home, or do you really forget your worries when you're lying on that sunbed? And he might get a yes or he might get a no, but in principle, he gets the response to that question and he starts to go again. And he then says, well, look, when was the last time you sort of really lived in the moment? And of course, he's steering them towards where he wants them to get. And they go, well, I don't know about that. And they said, well, come on, give me an example. When was the last time you really lived in the moment and you left your troubles behind and you just focused on having fun? That's why you're here on holiday, isn't it? And of course, they say yes. And he said, well, why don't you jump on this jet ski?
Yeah, absolutely.
and then I taught him the importance of guarantee.
Yeah.
Which he then said, jump on this jet ski and I guarantee if you don't forget about your worries and live in the moment for the next 20 minutes, I won't charge you for it. And of course, they always do. Because when you're trying to hang on to that thing at 40 miles an hour out of the ocean, the last thing you're thinking about is anything less than hanging on for dear life.
So that's a great one in terms of, one, he's emotionally intelligent. Even though he's like the guy selling the potato peeler, he's emotionally intelligent, but he's talking about benefits, isn't he? It's not, the feature is the jet ski that will go at 40 miles an hour. And
he's talking about the outcomes. You're absolutely right about living in the moment, enjoying yourself for 20 minutes, letting your hair down. But I guess the reason why I put him on the list and why I said at the start is the importance of being respectfully expectant, which is, if you do your job correctly, and all the things we've talked about so far on the podcast, are sales greats and indications of sales greatness. If you do all of those things,
yeah,
and like your franchise guy, if you've got this process, then you kind of earn the right for them to say yes to you, and therefore you can be, with respect, expectant of that outcome. Right, Neil. Number 5, your final one.
My final one, I won't name this fella because it's probably a bit unfair to him, really. But it is one of my old bosses, the guy I learnt the most from. And the reason for him is because there's a theme running through most of mine, which is he had enormous emotional intelligence. And he realised it was the little things that made a difference. So he was running sales teams, of which I was one, and I was one of his managers. But he understood the power of really impressing people with little things. Not about him, not about how big I am or what I am, but little things that made a difference. So, we've all heard of buying flowers for members of staff on birthday or cakes or whatever. But he took it to another level. So he realised that if you, from a sales viewpoint, if I want to ingratiate myself with the sales team, get them to go the extra mile and stay motivated and not leave, because this was a highly competitive environment. So rather than buying them flowers or giving them a bottle of champagne for birthday or whatever, he went one step further. I remember one of the guys he knew had a good relationship with his mum. On this guy's birthday, who was called Hugh, when Hugh's birthday, he bought Hugh's mum some flowers and a bottle of champagne and had them delivered to her home. And he had a little note in it saying, "Thanks very much for giving me your son, who's one of the best salespeople I've got, and we love him to pieces." And it didn't tell anybody about it, but he just did it. So you can imagine Hugh's mum, rings him up and says, "I've just had these flowers from a bloke I don't know, saying how wonderful you are." And of course, Hugh then thinks, my guy's got, the sun shines right out of his backside and thinks he's absolutely wonderful. And he was full of stuff like that, little touches which would make the difference. He would impress people with where we used to go for lunch. So if we were trying to recruit a team or whatever, which we quite often did from one of our rivals, he'd hire the really best hotel and he'd do it. And he'd turn up quite scruffy. He was never flashy or showy, but it was all the little things that he knew about people. I never knew how he did it because I never saw him make notes. But I guess he must have done, or he had one of these photographic type memories. But he knew everything about everybody, and he used that. It was, to a degree, you could argue it was manipulative, to a degree, which it could be. But it was very much about understanding what motivates people as the little things.
100%. And again, you're right. There's a fine line between manipulation and influence, but done the right way in the right dose, then it absolutely can help.
And also show that you're valued, isn't it? Because it's not just about we were all earning money, and that's one way of being valued. But actually, it's probably not enough. You need a bit more. And the other thing he was very good at, he would tackle money issues head on every single time. I went with him on various occasions when we were buying stuff, and he would be absolutely devastating in his negotiating tactics. So he would screw somebody down for price to an unbelievable extent, and they didn't know what would hit them.
So he must have been an inspirational boss.
He was extraordinary, and I loved him to bits, and he was very, very good to me.
Yeah, love it.
So who's your final fifth one?
So my final fifth one, Neil, is Ray Kroc, and Ray gets number 5 on the list off the back of an importance of being open-minded. So I don't know if you've seen the film The Founder with Michael Keaton, who plays Ray Kroc.
No, I've read the book. One of the books that he did.
Yeah, but for those that don't know, I mean, I can't believe anyone doesn't know who Ray Kroc is, but Ray Kroc was the guy that effectively brought McDonald's to the world. But yeah, if you've seen the film or if you've read the book or you know anything about Ray Kroc, then he had a really interesting start up in life, Neil. I don't know if you knew, but he was a pianist by trade and a musical director. He loved his music. But he couldn't make any money from working in the music industry. So he moved into real estate, an estate agent selling houses and property. And then eventually he sort of took those skills that he learned and started working for an organization called the Lily Tulip Cup Company, which are basically paper cups. And that got him into the world of sort of food and started honing his sales skills. And then he, as he went out to his customers, he met a guy who basically developed this ice cream machine that could make milkshakes, but he could mix 5 milkshakes at a time. And he liked that so much that he left selling paper cups and decided to start selling these milkshake things. And what he did was he bought a few of them, chucked them in the back of his car and tried to sell them on. So he sort of set himself up as his own business. And the reason I'm talking about being open-minded is it's kind of important in sales for us not to get so fixed on what we want that we miss better deals somewhere else.
Yeah.
Cut a long story short, when he was trying to flog one of these sort of multi-mixers to a restaurant in California, he came across a pretty outstanding restaurant run by a couple of brothers called Dick and Mac McDonald. And the rest is kind of history, really. He started up in business with them. They franchised. The brothers didn't really like the way and the pace in which Ray Kroc was growing the business, so they eventually sold to him. He then went on to produce, the world's largest restaurant chain that the world has ever seen. And I think he died in mid-1980s. And at that time, 7,500 restaurants and the revenue is 8 billion. Today, McDonald's have got almost 40,000 restaurants around the world, Neil.
Yes.
And every year they generate in excess of $20 billion. So to talk about a success story, he was really number 5 for me because I wanted him to be, for me, he is the world's greatest sales guy. But he was open-minded. And I think a key skill of sales greatness is to be open-minded. When you're in that conversation with a prospect or a potential customer, and you're doing the fact-finding discovery and you're asking questions, it's too easy, I think, for us to sit down with our list of pre-written questions thinking that that's the next question to ask. The correct question to ask is the one that comes off the back of their last answer. And being open-minded to come off your list and go in a different direction, I think, is what separates the average sellers to the best in class. And if you think about Ray Kroc, he wasn't fixed on his strategy of being the greatest milkshake machine seller.
Yes.
He actually ultimately ended up being a real estate owner because you could just see there was better potential for him in a different direction. I remember reading a book called Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. So it's a bestseller, a proper bestseller. And he's very clear on that. In the world of hostage negotiation, which is where Chris Voss earned his trade, he said the name of the game was always to be flexible. You had no idea where the conversation was going when someone's got a gun in their hand and a hostage held. You have to think on your feet and never be so fixed on what you want that you miss a better opportunity somewhere close by. And that's so true.
Yeah, it's good advice.
Why don't we just quickly summarize, if we can, and just sort of pick out sort of a key takeaway for each one. The first one, that your number one, remind us who it was and what was the key takeaway.
Key takeaway for me was the Cambridge hat guy was asking for the business. So he tackled the objection head on and then just asked for the business, albeit in a slightly sardonic manner. And I had no problem with it at all. He put me in the corner and I thought, actually, you know what? I did the right thing. I've subsequently bought 2 of these hats and I absolutely love them.
Brilliant. Number 2 on the list then was Daniel Priestley and the importance of positioning yourself as the go-to person in your market. What can you do to allow people to consume, products for prospects, information, video content, read posts, send them books, just pick up the phone and give them helpful information? What can you do so that when they decide they need some help, it's you they think of first?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think my number 2 was Seth Godin, which was very much similar to your Derek in terms of your number 4, in terms of he shows up there every day. He's consistent. The message is consistent. The quality is fantastic. And he's very much about articulating information and knowledge. He's not a pushy salesperson in any way, shape or form.
Great one, that one. My number 2 was Mike Winnett. Again, remind anyone who hasn't had a chance, go and check him out on LinkedIn, but also as important, go and have a look on YouTube. So deliver value is the key thing. Can you put stuff out there that, don't forget, value is only seen in the eyes of the recipient. So what's the perceived value you can put out there in the marketplace? How can you help people get involved with what it is that you've got? What was your number 3 one, Neil?
I think it was Dale Carnegie. And I think Dale Carnegie was all about the emotional intelligence, that understanding people are interested in themselves and what it means to them, and not interested in you per se or what you're selling. What they're interested in is what it means to them.
Perfect.
I think that's as relevant. Written in 1936, published in 1937, never out of print, and top 10 in China at the moment. So it's still entirely relevant. Who was your number 3? That was Joe Addis, wasn't it?
Joe Addis, yeah, the American potato peeler sales guy who turned a box of potato peels into millions and bought an apartment on Fifth Avenue. Yeah, again, go on to YouTube, check out Joe Addis. Watch the importance and the value that having a repeatable process has in terms of your sales results.
Yeah, and my number 4 was similar to that, which was Richard May, which was very much along the lines of having a process, and that prospects want to be led. As long as you're being led by somebody who's professional, got your interests at heart, and everything is laid out in a very transparent process, actually it's refreshing. And I had no problem being led at all. It was a very logical sequence and made you feel very comfortable.
Love it. Number 4 for me was Derek, my friend over in Barbados, the jet ski guy.
Yeah.
Shows up every day. So persistence was a sort of a hidden one in there. But the key takeaway for me for number 4 was being respectfully expectant. If you've got if you're in the marketplace, you've identified you're a customer, you're doing everything right in terms of your process, you're playing the long game, then you should ultimately have the ability to expect a result, and therefore go and get it. Be respectful, but expect to get what you're after.
Yeah, it's a great one, isn't it? And my final one was one of my old boss, who again demonstrated enormous emotional intelligence and realised the power of doing the little things to really, I suppose ingratiate's too strong a word, but to really make people think that you've got their best interests at heart, and you really think there's something special. Just forget the fancy watches and looking smart yourself. It's all about the little things you can do for other people, and little things can have a huge impact. That was my final one. And your final one was Ray Kroc, wasn't it?
Yeah, the founder of McDonald's as we know it today, and the sort of the backstory of which brought him from the world of music to the world of owning the largest restaurant on the planet, is his ability to be open-minded. So let's not always assume that the track we're on is the one that is the right one. Let's not miss better ones. So the more open-minded we can be, the more curious we can be, I think the better we give ourselves options to make the right decisions.
Well, it's been a cracking session. I appreciate you asking me to come along.
Good list. Yeah. Great list of 10 sales greats, Neil. Yeah, I'm really grateful for you jumping on and sharing your 5. And hopefully the audience have enjoyed the exchange between you and I. Neil, before you go, where can people find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Neil Foley, Foley, or they can find me via businessgrowthclub.net. So businessgrowthclub.net, and I'd be happy to talk. You know me, talk to anybody.
Folks, Neil, thank you for your time. Thank you, folks, for listening and tuning in. Be your best as always. And remember, everybody's in sales. We're all selling something. I'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode.